Welcome, dear makers, to another lesson in class in Reality Transurfing. Actually, it's a bit of a hybrid. We're doing Hermeticism and the 7 laws of the universe with application in RT. One of my gripes or issues with esoteric, occult, spiritual knowledge sometimes is that it sort of just sits in the cloud a little bit. It's a little bit too heady, too much theory-ish, a little bit too mystical and not very practical. And that's why I love Reality Transurfing. And so, but it's also important to understand the theory, because when you have theory, you can kind of create your own application as well. And when you understand these laws, you're going to be able to see your world in a whole new way. And the more that it kind of fits into your, it seeds within your mind, and also understand the application, you'll be able to understand the theory even better. And when you're able to have these laws, you can see the underlying energy and structure and mechanism behind the world. And when you're able to do that, then your world looks at you in whole new ways and just blossoms and appears to you literally different before your very eyes. And so it's actually magical. So without further ado, let's get into a bit of a preamble. These 7 laws that we're going to study are the foundation of Hermeticism, which is a branch of spiritual philosophy that actually dates back to the early 1st century BCE. And they were outlined by the famed mystic and mage, which was represented as the god of wisdom, known as Thoth in ancient Egypt, and also the god of wisdom in ancient Greece, known as Hermes Trismegistus, thrice the Great, and also known as Master of Masters. Now, he is believed to have written the Emerald Tablet and Corpus Hermeticus, 2 very highly influential ancient teachings. Now, there is a huge legend and mystery behind him that reaches more God level than man. He was known at his time as a master of the universe and is said to have lived for thousands of years. Now, over time, the 7 Hermetic principles were passed down by word of mouth from teacher to student, and eventually one day in the early 20th century, these teachings were compiled in a book called the Kybalion, which was supposedly written by the 3 initiates, which sounds extra cool and mystical, but it could have also been one guy, says the internet and the lore. But who cares? You know when something is true because, you can cross-reference it, triangulate it with other teachings from other schools of thought, and also it resonates when it's beauty, when it's divine, and it's truth. It resonates somewhere deep within you, and you know it's fact. Now, practicality in this knowledge is also why I love Reality Transurfing, because it gives you a real, true, practical, and esoteric system that is literally designed for you to live your best life. But obviously, there's also beauty and practical knowledge that can be found in every single corner of the world. And as a curious mind, I want to see what gems are lurking under each rock. So today we're going to expose the teachings of the 7 laws of the universe, but I'm also going to show you how we're going to apply it to your life. And so each theory that I'm going to show you is also, each principle or law is going to be theory, and then I'm going to also do application right after, and that will be the structure of the lesson today. So without no more preamble, let's just get into the thick of it with the law of mentalism. The law of mentalism can be encapsulated by this very short but potent statement that the all is mind and the universe is mental, meaning that consciousness is fundamental to everything else. It is the fundamental reality. To understand this, we have to look at what lies beneath everything that we see. We look at the material universe, the things that we can touch, the energy we can feel, and life itself, and we call it reality. But this law tells us that all of these outward appearances, underlying everything, is a single substantial reality called the All, or Spirit, or Adonai, or the unmanifested one, or the universal one, etc., etc., etc. And while this spirit is technically unknowable and impossible to define in human terms, the best way that we can think about it is as the universal, infinite, living mind. This means that the entire world and everything in it is actually a mental creation of the All. We don't live in a universe made of hard stuff. We live in a universe that exists within the mind of the All. And as the ancient saying goes, it is in this mind that we live and move and have our being. Now, why is understanding that the universe is mental the master key? By establishing the nature of the universe as mental, we can finally explain things that science has always struggled with, like psychic phenomenon, ESP, the power of thought, manifestation, UFOs, remote viewing. Once we understand the universe is mental, we gain this master key. And you begin to realize that matter and energy are only secondary. They are subordinate to the mind. And you stop living things by accident, right? Instead of using the laws of reality haphazardly that end up biting you in the butt or in a random way, you begin to apply them intelligently, purposefully, for your own advancements and making your destiny an actual reality and your dreams come true. And then mastery becomes possible because this is the fountainhead. Without this foundation, you are just knocking on doors that would never open. You're toiling with the reflection in the mirror instead of changing the image that's projecting it. But once you grasp that it is all a mental construct, you are now well on your way to the path of mastery. And as the old Hermetic masters say, he who grasps the truth of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path. I know this is really hard because we live in a world of matter. I'm knocking on this table. If I break my arm, that bone is broken. I'm going to have a really hard time just putting it into place with the power of my thoughts, right? There are two sides to reality, but fundamental to everything is consciousness. If you can master and learn how to change your consciousness, you can change reality. And you don't even need to get to a level of a high master yogi or Jesus or Buddha in order to be able to do so. You have the power of doing that right now. You are doing it right now. You just don't know exactly how because you don't have a full understanding of the laws of the universe and how to actually apply them to your life. And it takes a bit of time, so don't be hard on yourself, but you must be persistent and patient and have a little bit of compassion because you are a beautiful, wonderful, and intelligent human being. The other aspect that I'd love to embed in your mind, and that is, it's also a parallel teaching to reality transurfing, is that reality is very much like a dream. If the universe is the mind of the creator, then reality functions more like a dream, or people like to say a simulation, than a mechanical machine. Okay? And the same laws of how one operates in a dream also is applied to the waking dream. First, you have to become lucid in the dream and not just become a victim of your circumstance, of the nightmare. And you also have to have the realization that here you can do anything, particularly with the power of intention. And that's a big theme in reality transurfing. You can also change with also your state of being, and there's many other tools that can be used. But if you have the intention to fly in a dream, you simply get off the ground. And I made many videos about intention. I'll continue to discuss intention. But the same mechanics of how you can change a dream, whether it is your ability to fly, whether it is scenarios, whether it is to be able to do absolutely anything, problem solve, compose music, have relations with people, do the coolest possible fucking things where psychedelics can't even compare. It's all with the power of your intention and mastering, particularly outer intention. And this same stuff applies to the waking dream. But first, lucidity is necessary. The other idea that we want to instill and repeat a little bit over and over in ourselves is that if the universe is mental, then it is our mind that is the direct interface that we use to interact with it, right? Even Neville Goddard, Neville Goddard, what's his main fucking shtick? It's not a shtick, I just mean like his main idea that he wants to communicate with everyone is that we are imaginal beings. It is through our imagination that we can create. That is the ultimate truth. And this is also why, not to get into the whole Matrix thing, but I will in a second with Plato's allegory of the cave, but that is why there's a huge battle for your attention. Attention is how, when you manipulate attention, that's how you control the reality for the masses. And it is through your intention that you can feed areas of your life that you want to send energy to, and wherever energy goes, that's where life grows. And this is why so much of our attention is brought to the negative aspects of the world, because we want to continue to fuel that fear and frustration, because it keeps us locked in as slaves of the quote unquote the matrix. And I know that word has been charged with some grossness, but it doesn't take away from the truth of the fact that we live in a world of illusion. And it's with the power of the mind and imagination, and this to the point of visualization. When people talk about visualization, they don't really fully understand it. It is not visualizing. It's more than that. That is a term that people can understand from like a scientific materialistic perspective, but it's more than that. You are charging an idea and illuminating an aspect within or space within the alternative space to come into reality. It's not about the law of attraction. It is about focusing your attention on a world that you are building or that you want to illuminate, and then that comes into the form along with your frequency that's aligned with it. So visualization is much more than that. You are tapping into the mind of God. It is conscious creation. It is the highest form of prayer. When you create, you are using your imagination to do so. Now, one of the greatest metaphors for the Matrix and what is actually happening in reality, even before we had the Matrix, even before we had any sort of like even written media, there was Plato, one of the greatest minds of civilization and philosophers, understood this in a foundational way, and he expressed it through the allegory of the cave. Here we have prisoners, and these prisoners are tied down to a wall. They're tied down in chains in a way that they can only see the wall in front of them. They can't really look behind them. They can only see what's these shadows that are being projected on the wall. And these shadows are being projected by the rulers of their world, whoever they are. And we don't really know exactly who they are in our world. There's a bunch of quote unquote conspiracy theories around them being interdimensional beings, the reptilians that are working with the royal families and the Illuminati, and that's how it kind of trickles down. And we don't really know 100% for sure. In Reality Transurfing, we refer to them as the pendulums, which are informational, energetic entities. And they can also be like, the adjacency to the Matrix is that they're the sentinels, right? It was the AI and robots where, if you remember at the beginning of the video or the movie, where they needed energy in order to survive, and the humans, they blocked out the sun because the sentinels were using the sun as their main fuel source, but then they had that option go away, but then they realized that the human body also produces a great amount of energy, more than they needed, and so they began to harvest and farm human beings, and they put them in cells. And then they put them in the matrix for them to be able to be asleep within the cell, because they had their desires being fulfilled, or even they were struggling and they felt like they needed to fight in this made up world. And we are also in cells, but not in physical cells, but information cells. And so I can't believe he had this concept back in the day. It's actually truly mind-boggling. And so when we talk about the Matrix in this day and age, the way that other people on the internet talk about it, it's like the Matrix is the corporate world, but it's much more than that. It is reality itself. The Hindus had a name for it. It was called Maya. The Taoists called it the 10,000 things. Even Christianity had a term for it. I think they just called it the world. But it's an illusion. It's an illusion for what the real fundamental truth behind this reality is. And people say the goal of it is to transcend this illusion. That can be one goal. But you can also just live a beautiful life, because we came down here to experience this existence and this game as well. However you want to play the game, you can play it. So back to this allegory. I digress. I do that sometimes, but I think this stuff is important. So these masters, I digress because I was trying to explain who these, these guards were of the puppet or the cave. So they project these objects that go in front of the fire, and then they're projected onto the wall in terms of these shadows. And people believe that these shadows are real, and that's their reality, because that's all they've ever known. And for some reason, one day, one brave soul breaks out of his chains somehow, climbs over the guards, even at the time, and over the fire, even though the fire scared him a little bit because it was a little bit bright and hot. And this whole thing confused him looking backwards. But then he continued to eventually climb up there, up into the real world. And he was blinded by the sun, bewildered by what was going out there, but he eventually came to see it as, adjusted to it. And he saw it as, wow, so this is the real truth. What was happening down there was fake. This is incredible. He was enamored by what he saw. And so he obviously wanted to go back down, at least warn or help the other prisoners of this cave, i.e. Matrix. And so he came back down and he told them what was going on up there, and that was the real world. But they rejected him and they said, "You're crazy, man. That's not true. You can't see, this is the real world." And they did that because this is all they knew. And so the whole core message behind this, or the core meaning, is that most people mistake appearances and beliefs for reality. So true knowledge really comes from questioning illusions and seeking deeper understanding. But those who see the truth are often rejected by those who feel that they're still trapped in ignorance. And those are the kind of like the two sort of morals or themes of this story. And I think it's absolutely an amazing and very simple allegory to explain what goes on in today's world. One of the best and most simplest models, and often the best are the most simplest models for how we create our own reality, is expressed through this model of the projector. And so before you is a simple model of a projector. The other thing that I want to express is that we can't come up with anything in this world, with any sort of invention that does not already exist in reality. So the idea that we call ourselves, that we are projectors of consciousness, and also we have projectors to express how something like that works, is very interesting. And so what you have here on the light bulb represents raw reality. And this is the raw light. So you can also refer to it as source light. God, the soul, whatever. This is what reality looks like outside of our perceptions, outside of anyone really being there, right? So we don't know what that looks like necessarily, right? Because there's always someone there to perceive it in a particular way. And so we are the slide, right? We are the slide. So the raw light then passes through the slide, and that raw light then picks up on the images and the contours and the colors of the slide, and then it projects that onto the screen, which then that screen reflects back to us the world that is expressed through the slide. That gets like the slide filters that raw reality. And so your worldview, your interpretation of reality, your beliefs, your experiences, your perspective, your thoughts, your total vibratory state, they make up this slide, right? And so this is how it works. And this is why we also refer to reality being a mirror. It is you turned inside out. The universe is you in verse. And so everything that you see in reality, the people, the events, the scenarios, the environment, some of them was pre-programmed, but a lot of that stuff is you being flipped inside out. It is a direct and perfect reflection of you, although there's a bit of a delay in the mirror. And that is principle number 3 of the dual mirror, which we'll learn about later on, not in this one, but in another class. To conclude this section on the law of mentalism, I want to talk about techniques for a second and manifestation. I love techniques. I have a whole living library constantly growing of techniques in my community. And a lot of members and a lot of people ask me about techniques. When do I do this? Should I do it in the morning? Should I do it at nighttime? How long? How many minutes? Am I supposed to feel it over here? What can I use for this? So like, is it working? Blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, just to get down to the minutia and the details of the specifics of techniques. And techniques are wonderful tools. But what I always want to express with it is if you're not changing your consciousness, you're not doing anything. And so people go through techniques like as if they're just going through the motions, as if the techniques are in the result of themselves. And it's not. The techniques are simply tools for you to change your consciousness. So if you go through a visualization exercise and you don't feel a fundamental change, some sort in your internal state, in some sort of way, you just went through the motions and you did nothing. You just spun in circles. And so don't worry so much about techniques, but focus more on the shift in awareness, the shift in attention, and the shift in your consciousness and overall state of being and frequency. That's what I want to say, okay? Techniques are cool. I love them. But if it's not shifting your consciousness, then you're not doing anything. And most people, they don't really get that. You might have just even understood these words, but just allow that to sink in for a moment. It is a shift in consciousness that changes reality. That's what you're tapping into. And that concludes this section on mentalism. Now for the second law, the law of correspondence, which this one is probably one of the most popular because undoubtedly 100%, I would say almost 100% of you have heard the term as above, so below. And then if you go on the internet, you can also see some expansion to that with a continuation of as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. And this is one of my favorites because it really illuminates and brings a new perspective to life. This law tells us that there is perfect harmony and correspondence between the different levels of existence. Whether we're looking at the physical world, the mental world, or the spiritual world, the underlying laws are exactly the same. They don't change just because the scale changes. Here's why it's so freaking cool. Because you see the fingerprint of God in everything. It's like how a walnut is great for the brain and it looks like a brain, why carrots are wonderful for your eyes and it looks like an iris. And so this idea that the all is in the all and the all is in all. As above, so below. As below, so above. It is incredibly beautiful. And so the ancient Hermeticists considered this to be one of the most powerful mental tools ever discovered. They believed it was the key to prying aside the obstacles that hide the secrets of nature from us. And it was said to be the only way to catch a glimpse of the face of the goddess or the ultimate truth of reality. As the text beautifully puts it, studying the single cell, he understands the archangel. The key insights from this is that the microcosm is in the macrocosm, obviously, and so and the macrocosm is in the microcosm. The universe is a mirror, and what is happening in your internal world, thoughts and emotions on the physical plane, or this is the mental plane, is being mirrored in the external world, in your circumstances, on the physical plane. So on the mental plane, which we're going to learn about a little bit, our emotions, our thoughts, is being reflected also on the physical plane and our circumstances. And we can look at our circumstances to also see what are our subconscious beliefs. What are we really thinking? What do we really believe about so-and-so? The second insight is the fingerprints of the God pasted all over the universe. There is a common design language that can be seen throughout by this example and what I expressed before about the carrot and the walnut. So if you want to know how the all thinks, all you have to do is look at how a human mind works. And the mechanisms are the same, only that scale is different. And when it comes to this scale, even our waking dream, this reality, the physical reality, works very similar to the sleeping dream. If you want to fly in a dream, all you have to do is have the intention. But first, you have to become lucid and you have to realize that here anything is possible. And so we talk a lot about in Reality Transurfing about how you can switch lifelines through the power of outer intention. And we use outer intention as a way of helping the mirror meet us halfway. And so it all connects on every single plane. And you don't need to be a mystic to understand these higher dimensions. You just need to look at the patterns in your life and realize that they are reflections of a higher law. This section is the universal map. It explains how the entire universe is organized into a single continuous scale of existence. It uses the principle of correspondence to show that while the scenery changes, the laws remain the same whether you are an atom or an archangel. And so here's a relatively straightforward breakdown. Now we're talking about planes here, a plane. Now this is not a place that you go, nor is it just a feeling. It is a dimension of vibration. Think of it like musical scales. The lower the notes, the slower the vibrations, i.e. matter in this case, and the higher the notes, the faster the vibrations, all the way up to spirit. The higher the vibration, the more life it manifests. And so even though the universe is sort of one continuous flow, the Hermeticists divide it into three groups for easier understanding. We have the physical plane, which is matter and energy. And this includes everything that we can see and touch, but it also includes other things that science are just starting to discover or have discovered and taken off, like ether, right? Like ether acts as a bridge between solid matter and pure energy, carrying light, heat, and electricity. Matter is really just slowed down vibration. Everything is a manifestation all the way up to the spirit plane. So Source is really what is also referred to as the unmanifested one. And everything else, from the angels in the sky to the spinach stuck in your teeth, is a manifestation of that. And so everything is a manifestation of the one unmanifested. Cool. That was just a little side note. Then as we move up, we enter the mental plane. And so this is the scale of the mind, and everything has mind. Everything has consciousness because we are in one big conscious mind. There's just different degrees. And so on the first level, there is the mineral mind. And so that's even atoms. They have attractions and repulsions. Who says that a stone or a rock does not have a mind or consciousness? Things just move very slowly for it or them. Then plants and animals have minds. Obviously, you know that animals have minds, but plants have minds. They are conscious. There have been studies done that plants can experience emotions. It can identify certain individuals that enter a room. There have been studies done where people were mean to a plant, cut off a leaf, and they were able to put certain sensors on them where they can detect a particular vibration from them, and that plant would begin to scream as that person entered a room because they recognize them. The same thing with someone that they fall in love with, the kind of individual that would pet the plant, speak to the plant in a soothing way. And so if you have a plant at home, please be gentle to them, speak to them, care for them, as I'm sure you do, but they are conscious. And I think that's so freaking cool. Then we have, above that, we have the elemental minds. And these are the unseen entities that exist between the gaps of this kingdom that we know. You can kind of imagine these as the black keys on a piano. These are various different spirits. These are pendulums in transurfing. These are all of the different non-people entities that are here, but not sort of in a physical manner here. And then we also have the human mind. And the average human today is only on the 4th subdivision of the mental plane. But then we also have supermen or overmen, and they occupy the 6th and 7th subdivisions. And as we move even higher into the spiritual plane or the divine realm, this plane is inhabited by beings so advanced that their thoughts would seem like pure power to us. These are the spiritual masters, the archangels, the demigods, gods, and they all have a conscious and are very real. So the most important takeaway here is that all 7 principles work on every single plane. For example, gravity, which is the physical plane, corresponds to the attraction element, which is on the mental plane. You have the gender of, which you're going to learn about more, but the gender of battery, right? We have a positive and we have a negative. This corresponds to the gender of the mind, where there is a will, a conscious will, and a subconscious. And so because the laws are consistent, if you understand how a low law works, you can use that correspondence principle to figure out how a high law works. To ground the theory of correspondence, let's apply it to a concept you might be familiar with, and that is self-identity and how that works. So at the very top, we have the spiritual plane. And pardon my writing. Okay. In the middle, we have the mental plane. I don't need to write that. And finally, we have the physical. So at the very tippy top, let's use this color. The spiritual plane is your I am. Right? I am. Neville Goddard loves the I am. That's when you make a claim of who you are. And God, the reference is that his name is I am. And I am is where your self-identity exists. It is the container for all that you are. In the mental plane, that's where all your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, expectations, perceptions, worldview exists. All of that exists in the mental plane. And in the physical, this is your actions, your habits, behavior. You could even add addictions, etc. And so remember this, your self-identity is actually the container for everything else. And so if you're able to change your concept of your I am, then you can change your whole reality. You can change the thoughts and emotions and the beliefs that you have about certain things. And then therefore you can change your actions and behaviors in the way that you interact with certain people, in the way that you move through your work, through your business, etc. And then you change your, obviously, your circumstances and environment. You change your life, all through the aspect of changing your self-identity by claiming a new I am. And so this is how this idea of correspondence applies to an actual aspect of your life and this work in manifestation. So if you can claim a new I am, you can claim a new reality, because your personality, your self-identity, your self-concept, and your reality are synonymous. And there you have it. A way to take this a bit further is through an alter ego. Some of the best performers that you know have alter egos. What do you think all rappers are? They don't even use their government name. They have an alter ego name, a rap name. Rick Ross is not really Rick Ross. He wasn't gangster. He didn't sell any drugs. But he adopted that ego. He took the name from someone else. He adopted that alter ego and then literally stepped into that lifestyle. He wasn't born as Rick Ross, even as that personality. He adopted that personality and it literally manifested into form. Same thing with every single other one. There are very few true gangster rappers or people who really live that authentic lifestyle. A lot of them, like Tupac, he came from art school. There's so many of them that are like that. Beyonce, she has an alter ego as well. I mean, Beyonce is pretty fierce, but she has Sasha Fierce, which is another alter ego of Beyonce. I believe even Taylor Swift has one. Lana Del Rey is an alter ego of, I don't know what her real name is, but of Lana Del Rey. All of Lady Gaga, same thing. They are all reinventions of an older version of themselves. And so if you're trying to live a new life or level up into another version of yourself, think about creating an alter ego that you can step into and embody that essence. We're going to move quickly through this theory section because it's relatively self-explanatory, and I want to spend more time on the application because that's where all the value is with this law. This is a core truth that is also understood by modern science today, and that is the fact that nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. And you even have our boy, Nikola Tesla. He's very famously quoted for saying, if you wish to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And I want to focus on this idea of frequency. Everything, well, in the manifest word is energy, and energy is expressed as vibration, and the difference in vibration is expressed as frequency. Frequency is that unique fingerprint or identity of a specific vibration. And in our world, we're dealing in terms of emotions. That's usually when we're talking about frequency, the underlying characteristic of it or how you would describe it is in relation to emotion. But first, let's discuss how a frequency is measured, just for general knowledge. So it's measured in hertz, and 1 hertz represents one complete wave cycle, one peak and one valley measured at a fixed point. The reason why I want to bring that to your attention is because I want you to understand, and you might be familiar with this, but brain waves. So right now, discussing it, and when you're kind of just like moving throughout your life and using your mind a little bit and kind of a bit focused, you're in a beta state. That's 13 to 30 hertz. You're in analytical thinking, logical processing, you have external focus, and that's just when you're moving through your everyday life, right? Then as you get into a bit of a more of a lower brainwave state, you begin to step onto the bridge between the conscious and the subconscious. You're kind of a bit more relaxed, you might be learning something, or you have sort of passive attention. When you're watching TV, you're kind of in this alpha state between 8 and 12.9 hertz, and so you're easily also programmable. Then you move into theta, between 4 and 7.9 hertz. And this is a great place to do self-hypnosis, or to program your subconscious mind, or deep visualization. When you meditate on your cushion or on your chair, whatever, you're ultimately trying to end up in theta state. Well, actually, you're trying to get all the way to gamma. And there's another one below delta, but you're trying to enter this deeper state. Most people will end up on theta if they spend 15 minutes to meditate. And delta is sort of, you're in the unconscious plane. You're kind of dreaming, but it's a sleepless dream, and that's 0.5 to 3.9 hertz. But the reason I want to bring this up is to bring your attention to the alpha, and particularly the theta state, because when you want to do your visualizations, you're most easily programmable at that state, and you naturally are there when you wake up and before you go to sleep. And that's why Neville Goddard was also used to say, enter a state akin to sleep. What he really meant, or what we now know he meant due to modern science, is entering a state of theta. And that's why I want to bring this chart to your attention. And a little bit about that, you'll be able to understand in the different phases that you're in, particularly if you're thinking about beta, alpha, theta, when you're meditating. When you go into alpha, you'll begin, that like monkey mind will begin to slow down. The worries about life and what you need to make for dinner, or who you need to pick up, or who you need to call back, the meetings that you have, that will begin to diminish. And once you enter theta, I kind of think about it as entering a completely blank room, the blank room of your mind. And there you can kind of explore more freely. As you are moving through alpha, you still need to focus on your breath. You still need to kind of keep a single-minded focus because you're still kind of moving through the no man's land, so to speak. But once you kind of drop in to theta, you can kind of like almost let go a little bit in your meditative state and explore your subconscious mind or imagination as you kind of do your exercises. And so that's why I want to bring up this chart for you. The next thing that we're going to talk about, where we're going to spend a lot of our time on, is levels of consciousness, or Frederick Dodson, we're going to focus on his chart. It's levels of energy, he refers to them. But there's many people who created, or groups who've created various different measurements of consciousness based off of emotions. You had David R. Hawkins, and this is his levels of consciousness. Abraham Hicks also has an emotional guidance scale. There's also another one called the Spain scale, which is kind of relatively famous for saying that authenticity is the highest emotion, which are all interesting. But today we're going to focus on the levels of energy. The reason why this is so important is because it's all about identifying your frequency based off of your base emotional state. And this is also referred to as your total vibratory state, or state of being. And this whole thing is made up of your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, expectations, etc. And this is your level of consciousness, and it determines how reality shows up in your life. Your energy level or consciousness level determines what opportunities you notice, what people appear in your life, what actions feel natural, and ultimately what realities become accessible to you, what manifests in your life. For example, if some people on a lower state of consciousness, if this was literally on a coffee table, or maybe they're visiting a friend, they would probably not even see this book. It would be there, but they would not be able to register it. Or if they picked it up and looked at these words, even for someone, if it sounded like poetry and it was the most revolutionary thing possible, if they don't cross the threshold of the consciousness level where this book resonates at, they would think it was total garbage and nonsense. And I've seen this over and over and over in my life. And so literally the things that show up in your life, the things that resonate, need to match to a certain extent your own frequency or consciousness level. And so without further ado, and this is why this is so important. And as I go through this scale, and just be mindful of maybe times in your life when you're at that energy level or consciousness level, and what life felt like, what appeared in your life, and how things have changed as you've moved up or down on it. Ideally, you're moving higher, but we all have days and times in our life where things were a little bit more of a struggle. But bless them, because they helped us become the people that we are today. So in this section, we're going to focus on the survival consciousness. This is the lower energy states. So overall, these levels represent states where most of the person's energy is consumed by internal struggle, and they're just trying to survive. Reality will feel extremely heavy, and they're constantly reacting, and it will be very, very difficult to change because their attention is locked in on problems rather than any kind of possibilities. And when your attention is locked in on problems, all you see and all you experience are more problems. From 0 to 30, you're basically dead. You're dying. You're collapsing. You're on your way to death if you can't get out of it. You have no vitality. You've got complete disconnection from life force, and you're probably facing extreme illness, and death is on the horizon. So enough about that. Then, as we move up a little bit between 30 and 50, we're dealing with shame and apathy. And these are some of the worst possible levels that you can be at. Your life force is also extremely diminished because shame makes people feel fundamentally flawed and unworthy, so they hide from life and avoid visibility, and then also withdraw from any sort of opportunities or possibilities to get themselves out of it and push people out of their life, etc. But as energy moves on to apathy, the person begins to continue to feel powerless and defeated, and often what they do makes no difference. This is also where poverty thinking thrives, and then therefore life feels hopeless and motivation is not there, and the future more or less looks like the same struggle. As we move up a little bit, things do get a little bit better. We tap into grief and fear. Now, grief keeps a person mentally anchored in loss. What went wrong, what was taken away, what should have been different, and they're sort of looping those ideas over and over and over again. But as energy moves into fear, the mind becomes hyper-focused on danger and uncertainty and survival, and people at this level often make decisions defensively, trying to avoid pain rather than create something meaningful. And so life becomes all about managing threats instead of expanding possibilities. As we move into the final level of the lower energy states, we tap into desire, anger, and pride. Here, energy does become a bit more active, and it is sort of driven outward, and it is reactive. Desire creates constant craving, and people believe something outside of them will finally fulfill that void and make them happy, so they chase money, relationships, status, and validation. Anger follows that when those desires are blocked, leading to blame, conflict, and frustration. And then you have pride. Pride sits at the top of this range and appears confident on the surface, but is obviously fragile and dependent on the approval, comparison, and being right and being validated by others. And so at this stage, people can achieve things, but their identity is still tied to proving themselves rather than expressing their true power. Then we get to the turning point at level 200. And something important happens. This person begins to move from a victim consciousness into creator consciousness. So instead of blaming circumstances, people, or fate, or God, the individual starts to take responsibility for their life and their own choices. And we call this the kind of the courage stage because what they have to admit kind of takes some courage. They'll say something like, I may not be able to control everything that happens in my life, but I can change how I respond and what I create from here. And so at this level, people begin to see possibilities where they previously saw obstacles, and motivation increases, learning becomes appealing, and the individual becomes willing to improve their situation rather than simply enduring it. It marks the beginning of true personal power because energy is no longer spent on resisting reality. It is directed toward shaping it. And then we move on to middle consciousness, and we also call this constructive living. In the middle level of consciousness, this is kind of where most people in productive society lie, and then people begin to function in a stable and productive way. Life becomes less about emotional survival and more about growth, learning, and building. These states of like neutrality, willingness, acceptance, and reason become dominant. And here is where individuals tend to become more emotionally balanced and pragmatic. They stop reacting strongly to every challenge and instead are solution-oriented. Relationships also improve in this stage because people become less defensive and it's more about cooperation. And there's a growing sense of personal responsibility and capability. This is the range where many successful professionals operate. They adopt strategic thinking, discipline, intellectual clarity, and people begin to create meaningful structures in their life, whether it's their careers, their businesses, certain systems, knowledge, whatever. That being said, while life becomes much more productive, it may still feel quite effort-based because it's driven by logic and planning rather than deep intuition. So there's still a significant amount of struggle that is here because you're still sort of fighting to get what you desire and want out of life. But as we move on to higher consciousness, this is all about alignment and flow. And at these higher level, something begins to shift as well. Instead of operating primarily through this logic and effort, individuals begin living through connection and intuition and inner alignment. And so these level states such as love, joy, and peace begin to dominate this range. People at these levels experience a deep sense of interconnectedness with others and with life, and compassion naturally replaces judgment, and creativity becomes effortless. And because resistance and fear decrease here, energy becomes abundant, and many people will report increased synchronicity or flow in their life. Manifestations also become kind of effortless here. Intuition becomes dominant. And as I mentioned, synchronicities begin to increase. And then we get to the enlightened states, and that's where we experience unity consciousness. This is where all your sort of grand masters, spiritual teachers, and you reach sort of like full-blown unity with the universe. And then past 1000, you evaporate into the oneness. And so there's not much to be said here because you're literally transcending the individual self. And so we can kind of summarize the progression like this. Below 200, life feels like survival and reaction. 200 to 400, life becomes more about growth, learning, and building, but you're still dealing with your traditional sort of materialistic and struggling and adding a lot of effort to building your life. And then 500 to 600, life becomes about alignment, creativity, love, flow, synchronicities, manifestations, etc. And then 700 and above, you're basically transcending this world. And so it no longer matters. You're, chilling with God at that point. The other aspect of this is that you're always telling the mirror what to become, right? And this is what I always say. And then you want to follow that by the sentence or the idea that if my frequency right now were to manifest instantly in front of me, what would be shown, right? So usually, almost always, there's a delay in the mirror. So if I am always telling the mirror what to become, but there's a delay in the mirror, that result or outcome is always postponed to a later version of me. And it's very easy for us to let go of that and allow that for that to happen, for a future version of me to take like the blunt end of the stick. But if you ask yourself, what would appear right now based on my current vibratory state? What would show up in front of me? It brings more clarity to your own frequency and state of being. And so this is why I find this chart to be extremely valuable and why we took the time to properly go through it. Because based off of these levels of energy and consciousness, this is what literally manifests into your life. These are the people that come into your life and help out with certain connections or plans. These are books that come into your life to show you a new path or a new knowledge. These are ideas that show up in your mind, which then give you the right hunches, and then you take the right actions. These are the doors that begin to open up to you for opportunity. This is all dependent on the invisible hand of the universe, outer intention, that comes and helps you meet the mirror halfway so that you don't struggle and just push endlessly to try and make your dreams come true, like pushing a boulder up a hill for perpetuity. Life begins to work with you as you move up these levels of consciousness, these levels of energy. And so just keep this in mind and be honest with yourself, where you at and how much you need to progress to truly begin to live a life of your dreams. Now we move on to the law of polarity, and it is expressed through this core truth. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And so a great metaphor for this is the thermometer. Where does heat begin and cold end? Where do you draw the line on this? And it's quite subjective. Cold is just a term we use for a lower degree of heat. There are two poles on the same thing. There are two poles on temperature. Large and small are just different degrees of size. Hard and soft are just different degrees of density. Black and white are just different degrees of light. And because of this, we also realize that extremes meet. If you go too far in one direction, you eventually find the essence of the other. And in terms of the ice, you might have heard of dry ice, where it's so cold it feels like it burns. But more practically, we can kind of see this in the political realm. The far left and the far right, it's a great representation of this idea, where they move so far in extreme that they're not on opposite sides of the spectrum, but actually meet almost together, kind of like in this shoehorn diagram. Let's also look at love and hate. They often seem as total opposites, but they're just two poles of the same emotion. This is why it's so common to see someone flip from intense love to intense hate in a matter of seconds. The string that they're on is actually the same, and they've just sort of shifted their position. And also, can you really hate someone? Can you actually hate someone that you don't actually love? See, you can't. I've never been able to hate someone that I didn't actually already love. I never really hated anyone, but I never felt these like strong emotions. I have a weird relationship with my father, and I have such strong emotions towards him in, on a certain side of the degree because I love and I care about him. In transurfing, we have certain laws as well. They're just explained a little bit differently, but they're very much aligned with this. And so this is a great time to bring up the law of balance in transurfing. And the law of balance is said to be the primary law of the universe because the universe is in a constant attempt to get back into harmony, to get back into balance. And you can think about it as everything as sort of pendulums. They're always moving because absolute balance does not exist. If you had absolute balance, nothing would happen. And that's why we have vibrations. Vibration is energy in motion. And so you can also see like a pendulum is the physical representation of vibration, right? When you see it, it's sideways, it's moving like this. But if you were to put it on a track and you looked at it from above, you would see it in terms of this sort of like vibration, right? And so if something gets out of hand, you see these vibrations, they're sort of like these pendulums are knocking back and forth. And if they swing too far, they begin knocking into other things. And you can see yourself also as a pendulum. And every pendulum has an acceptable range of motion, right? This would be your acceptable range of motion. You can swing all the way over here, but if you end up swinging too far into this direction, you create what's called excess potential, okay? Excess potential immediately invites balancing forces to come and neutralize the thing that caused the excess potential. And that's the source of it, and that's usually you. And so how do you create excess potential? Well, you create it by it's like we refer to it as importance, by causing importance towards something, by making something really important. On the energetic side, that's how you create excess potential. But there's two versions of importance. There is inner importance, and then there's outer. On the two poles of inner importance, you can think about it as an inferiority complex, meaning I'm not good enough, shame, did I spell that right? An inferiority complex. And on the other side, you can say it's a superiority complex. It doesn't have to come to this extreme. I'm just giving you an example of it. Or like, I'm the best, my job is the best, my job needs me, no one can do what I do, etc. And so if you think too low of yourself or too high of yourself, you create an imbalance in the field, and that's the excess potential. And then life, the universe, balancing forces, is going to come and flick you on the ear if it's small enough, or it could give you a big slap in the face or push you off the cliff. That being said, there's also a thing referred to as outer importance. And that is when maybe it's a project or something that you want to get done with your life, you end up putting it on a pedestal. And you say that the mountain is too high, too treacherous, too scary to climb. And then you can flip back to the inner importance and it's like, I don't have what it takes to climb it. And so by putting that big goal up on the pedestal, giving it so much importance, then you make that goal unreachable for you. And so balancing forces is always going to come and chop you at the knees to bring you back at your sort of sustained state that you're used to because you've put something on a pedestal. Another example is, say that a really easy example of this is, And you can see how this happens in your life. Say, for example, you put a plank on the ground in your living room. You could walk that plank no problem whatsoever. But then if you put it between two skyscrapers, immediately the importance goes up, your balance wavers, and you're going to have a hard time crossing it. And so you can see balancing forces then would have a very difficult time, because it's most likely going to push you off. And so it usually needs to get rid of the source that created that imbalance. And so remember those terms. Importance equals excess potential equals balancing forces coming to neutralize that excess potential. And so what you really need to focus on is the importance that you give to things. Almost all of the problems in your life are due to the importance that you give something. And I'm not going to go I've had a whole other lesson on this subject, but this is something I wanted to kind of refresh or bring to mind that it was associated with this law of polarity. And I'm also going to show you some of the other tools on how to mitigate some of these issues in the next section. Now onto the law of rhythm. Now this law is represented in the following core truth. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its ties. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The rule is simple. The swing to the right is measured by the swing to the left, and you cannot have a high tide without having a low tide. But most people fall victim to this swing because when things are going well, they're on a high, but because they don't understand this law, when they sometimes get blindsided when the tide inevitably gets pulled back out. And so they're used by this law and tossed around like a paper boat in a storm instead of using this law for their own benefit. Here's a few ideas to keep in mind when it comes to the law of rhythm. The tide is always going to turn, my friend. If you are in a low season, you can rest assured and guaranteed the tide will come back in. But if you're in a high season, you should stay grounded so that you're not devastated when the rhythm shifts. Also, neutrality is power. You don't have to fight the downward swing. You just have to refuse to attach your identity to it. By staying neutral, you actually stay empty, and you don't allow for the pendulum to hook you. So as mentioned, that this law of rhythm is closely related to the law of polarity. In the last section, I mentioned how importance creates excess potential, which invites balancing forces to neutralize the threat or the source of the excess potential, which is you in some sort of way. It'll sabotage what you want to get done. And importance comes in two forms. It comes in inner. So I'm not good enough, or I'm amazing, or outer. And that is then like outer being the mountain is too high, it's too treacherous, and scary, etc. And so there is one technique for helping out with inner importance, and usually people don't have a problem with like me being too good. It's a problem of inferiority. I don't have what it takes. And so there's a technique called I can do anything, and this is really simple thing to do, but I really love it. And whenever you're feeling less than, down on yourself, just take a moment, or before you're about to do a task of anything, just take a moment to kind of jazz yourself. And I'm going to explain why this is really important, but like get energy in your body and really realize, come to the conclusion and result that you truly can do anything. And so what you want to do is just sort of bring your arms close to you. This is best done when you're standing up, and imagine a balloon or an energy ball beginning to grow from the inside and out of you. And as it begins to grow, you build up this feeling of I can do anything. And then you build it up within inside of you. You say, I can do anything. And you like begin saying it in your head. You begin whispering it out loud a little bit. And then if you can say it out loud with words, you go, I can do anything. And then you allow the energy balloon to explode. And this gives you a great sense of power and releasing that sort of energy into the world, that you truly can take on anything that the world has in front of you, anything that is necessary for you to, meet your goal. And then you want to walk to your goal or move as you're going towards your goal as if you're going to get eggs from the grocery store. We tend to, all we're doing every single day is just putting one foot in front of the other, but we tend to, make everything else feel so much heavier. But we're just taking everything one moment at a time. And so if you can transition your mindset to the task that I have today, whether it's a presentation, whether it's an interview, whether it is setting up an email sequence, whether it's recording a video, it is as simple as me going to the grocery store to get eggs. So that's called pure intention. So pure intention and I can do anything are two techniques to help you with inner importance. When it comes to outer importance, there are two techniques that I'd like to share with you as well. And one is more of an idea, and it's more of like an idea of like how you should think about something, a framing of it. But it's the fact of that there is no mountain. One of the biggest falsehoods that we tell ourselves is that there's actually a challenge up ahead of us. The fact is that there's never a mountain. There's no challenge. We create the mountain, and we create it out of importance. So if you can tell yourself before you hit any sort of task, before you're supposed to do some sort of challenge or an activity throughout your day, no matter how big or small it is, if you can affirm to yourself that there actually is no mountain, it will significantly diminish the intensity and gravity of the thing before you. And so that's the idea of it, there is no mountain. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention is the rude technique. And I absolutely love this one. We often put our goals on a pedestal, right? This is supposed to be like 1, 2, 3. We put it on a pedestal, like, wow, could I ever really achieve this? This thing is pretty high up there. Could I ever really get 100,000 followers, 1 million followers? Could I really make a business out of this? All the other people who did this were greater than me. They had different talents. They had better resources. They grew up in a family. Their parents saw them. They helped them out. This goal is really high up there. Could I really ever achieve it? And this is kind of like a fun one. You basically begin talking shit to your goal. Like, who do you think you are? You think you're better than me? You think I can't get you? You're just another Tuesday. And you become so rude, so insolent, that you basically knock the goal off its pedestal and onto the dusty ground before you so that you can just easily kick it into an empty net. That really brings that mountain that you see into just another normal thing, because nothing is greater than you. You are capable of absolutely anything. And by applying the rude technique about talking smack to the goal before you, the thing that you want to achieve, that you've put on a pedestal, and just knocking it down a few notches does absolute wonders. And I did that with social media, on Instagram particularly, because I have all my friends there, and I just started this, and I want them to see that I succeed, etc. And I was having a really hard time because I was putting videos that I created on Instagram on a pedestal. Because it's harder to explain these ideas in that 1.5 minutes. And I wanted to see my friends like me succeed. And I had it on a pedestal. And one day I just was walking around my room, just blabbering, talking shit to this goal. I was like, what? Like a couple 100,000 views? That's nothing to me. I can get that easily. I'm so charming, so intelligent. The ideas I have are absolutely fantastic. There's nothing that you're like, who do you think you are? You're nothing. You're just an idea in my head. And I was just like talking shit. And then the next 2 days, I had a video that went viral that hit 200,000 views. And that was fantastic. And ever since, that goal was definitely knocked off the pedestal, and I saw it as completely achievable. We should talk about another technique because this one's really important. As you move through life, we call this navigating the alternatives flow. When you ask for a manifestation or a change in your life, you better expect that there's going to be changes in your life. And people are not prepared for that. They think that there's going to be a smooth transition often towards their new life, their new goals, their new desired reality. And sometimes people ask for radical change, and radical change would have to happen. And sometimes that looks like a very scary thing in the reflection of the mirror. And so how do you navigate that? Because if you see something seemingly negative or scary and you declare it as negative or bad for you or something that's going to take you backwards, then that's what will be. You always have a choice when there's a fork in the road. If you declare it as positive, it will become positive. And so that's where this idea of coordination, that's what that term is, embrace all reflections as positive. That's basically what coordination means. Or there's the idea of advantage. And I like this one a little bit better because the term is, and it also frames things a little bit differently in the mind. So basically, advantage is whenever you are faced with a seemingly negative scenario, declare advantage, wake up, call out the advantage, and then look for what is the actual benefit in here. So it could be the fact that you are on a road trip and you busted a tire and you go, oh smokes, I get to learn how to change a tire right now. What a great life lesson to learn with my buddy who I'm on this road trip with. Or you look around and you see that there's a group of individuals who are your age and you ask one of them for help and you just made some new friends. Or you look around, there's a wonderful little diner where you end up taking some refreshments and you end up having the best apple pie of your freaking life. And that's an advantage. That's just all part of the journey. And so no matter what happens in your life, as you're creating your manifestations and your new realities, particularly if they're radical, there's going to be some great changes in your life. And you always have to seek out the advantage. And it could be for personal growth. It could be for absolutely anything, but you have to seek the advantage. And this will bring wonderful new results and new perspective into your life. And people will see you in a whole new way. They go like, what the heck is up with you? Nothing can sway you. You're always a wonderful little bright light of joy and amazing to be around. And you'll become more magnetic with this technique. I absolutely assure you of it. Okay, so that brings us down to that law. And now we're on to the law of cause and effect. The core truth of this principle is actually quite unavoidable, and I love it. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for a law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. And so this principle is really about, just to affirm again, that there are no accidents, no coincidence, and no bad luck streaks that don't have a root cause. Everything happens according to law. The masses are moved around like pawns on a chessboard. They're constantly being influenced by external sources, whether it's pendulums, the structure, the things on TV, the dumb things on their phone and social media, society, their own moods, suggestions from others, etc. They are the effect of causes that they did not choose. But the masters understood the art of rising to a higher level of consciousness By mentally moving to a higher level, they stop being a pawn and start becoming the player. They dominate their own moods, their own characters and qualities, instead of actually being played by the world. And so these masters understood that they choose their cause, their internal state, their own state of being and intention, and that's what dictates the effect, the external reality that they see. There are some brilliant insights and ideas when it comes to this law of cause and effect. The first one is that there's no small events. There is no great, there is no small. A random email or a missed bus could be the start of a massive chain of events. And so there are no small events. Everything in your world has a sort of butterfly effect to it. Second is that chance is an illusion. When you say, I got lucky, you are simply ignoring the mental or energetic cause that you set in motion earlier. When you own your causes, you begin to own your own results, and you stop becoming a victim and you become a player of the world. Third, stop being an effect. If you're constantly reacting to the news, your boss, your bank account, you are a pawn. In order to become a mover, a player, you have to stop reacting to these effects, which are external sources, and you have to actually understand the cause of your reality, the internal source. You can't allow for the external world to tell you who you are and how you should be and how you should behave. You have to constantly go back into the image that is being projected into the mirror, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Fourth is the ladder of causation. There are many levels to this law. If you feel stuck on the physical plane, move on to the mental. If you feel stuck on the mental, move on to the spiritual. You have to find the cause that's actually going to shift your situation. And so we're going to learn about that right now. Since time immemorial, the ancients understood that there was two sides to reality. On one side of reality was the energetic one, the metaphysical. And on the other side of the reality, they understood the material world. This was the physical. This is the one that you know and love. They also understood that one was the cause and the other one was the effect. Just like in this law, it's the exact same. This is actually from Transurfing. And this is a mirror. And so you have to remember, on a mirror, there's always, when you stand in front of the mirror, there is the person standing in front of it. And in this case, we're going to represent it by the image. And on the other side of the mirror is the reflection. The reflection is an illusion to a certain extent. It's always going to be an effect of the cause. You're never going to stand in front of the mirror and expect the mirror to smile before, the reflection in the mirror to smile before you do. That would creep you out. That would creep me out. That happened in a lucid dream recently, and it did. It freaked me out. So you're also never going to expect, if I have a stain on my shirt, to look in the mirror, see that I have a stain on my shirt, and then lick my tongue and try and wipe the stain off my shirt by rubbing it off on the reflection. No, I have to change the image. I have to change my actual shirt. And so you have to always think about, like I mentioned, you're always telling the mirror what to become. And I think a great way of sort of thinking about this is in terms of action. So what does that really mean? Okay, well, action is kind of an illusion to a very large, great extent. Everything before action comes from first the spiritual, and then the mental, and then the physical plane. So the kind of action that you're going to take is always going to be rooted in, one, on the high level, and we talked about this in another section, your identity, but you can also tap into on the mental of like your frequency. right? And so there's always going to be, before you take any action, you can tap into an infinite different variety of outcomes and possibilities, right? Depending on which outcome you want, you can have maybe a negative outcome, one that's not so favorable, or you can have a more positive outcome. And so if you're able to, before you take action, tap in and you want sort of this result over here, you have to get yourself in the frequency, in the identity, embodiment of the energy of this outcome. You want to be wonderfully spoken. You want to do the exercises. Do the exercise of I can do anything. I am powerful. I'm able to stand in front of people on the stage in my power. And you want to be able to tap into that frequency, because that frequency of this first is the frequency, and then that leads to the thoughts that you have, the choices then that you make, and then the action that you take. And so you can see that that frequency is actually a cause, and this is the effect. So no matter whatever you do, you have to be awake enough to realize and ask yourself the idea of like, what am I telling the mirror to become? Before you take an action, have the intention of what you want the outcome to be. Be conscious of the intention of what you're telling the mirror to become with the energy that you're giving off. If you want someone's attention and you're being needy, that's very repulsive. You can tap in to that energy. I promise you, this will make significant change in your life. If you're about to record something on camera and you're feeling quite contractive, then it's literally going to show up. Social media is a wonderful feedback mechanism because it is almost instantaneous. There's not many things in this life that are as instantaneous with you taking a video, putting it up on the internet, and allowing the marketplace to decide yay or nay. You obviously don't want to give your power away, but basically they decide on what is good or bad. Authenticity and energy helps way more than having the perfect words written down. There are so many times when I showed up on camera and I thought I was gonna have a banger because the idea was sick. I said everything perfectly. But when I look back on it, I'm like, it was as if my personality had evaporated out of my body and a Dementor manifested in the room and just sucked it all out of me. And then when I shifted my frequency, when I shifted my energy, the results showed up. It's gonna be every single time, but like literally 90% of the time, it works in this way because it is a direct reflection. It's not always one for one, but it's a direct reflection. So always tap in. What is the frequency that I'm adjusting to that reality that I want? And it's usually, honestly, just high energy. The fact that you can do anything and there's no mountain before you. Nothing is on a pedestal. You're not creating any sort of importance. And this stuff right here, oh my God, it is absolutely magical. And so that's how you apply the law of cause and effect in your own life. And finally, we have the law of gender, which is represented by this great truth. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and its feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Of course, this is not just about sex or biology. Gender is a universal law that exists on all planes of existence, from the physical, like in a battery, and on the mental, will, and the subconscious, and on the spiritual. The word gender actually comes from a root meaning to beget or to create. The law simply states that for any creation to happen, you have to have these two distinct energies and they must interact. Masculine and feminine, positive and negative, an electron and proton, etc. Every single person and everything contains both elements. The masculine principle is the energy of will, direction, and action. It is the generator that initiates projects or movement. And the feminine principle, that is the energy of reception, of nurturing, and it is the womb where the actual work of creation takes place. Obviously, you can't have a child with only one parent, and you can't have a reality shift with only one energy. If all you have is the masculine energy, then you're all hustle and will with no place for the seed to grow. If you're all feminine energy, you are all dreaming and just filled with potential, but no direction to spark it into life. When you learn how these two energies balance within your own mind, you can learn how to create your own reality intentionally rather than by accident. Gender is the sacred process of bringing the unseen into the seen. And so there's some interesting ideas that go along with this law of gender. And the first is a bit of a warning. Most people fail because they try too hard. They force things into happening instead of just sometimes bringing that feminine principle as well, because you need that balance. And that principle teaches us that we must also allow, we must nurture, we must detach for the process to grow. The second is that of the sacred internal marriage. Your will, the masculine, must plant the seed of an idea into your subconscious, the feminine. Then the subconscious does the heavy lifting of manifesting that idea into the world. And then finally, I would just say that you have to be in balance, right? Integration is about being in balance. Whether you are man or female, you must embody both energies in accordance with who you are. We're always going to lean a little bit, but that's what it, in my opinion, means to be a man, is to drink the whole cocktail of life. You have to be strong, you have to use your power when necessary, but then you also have to be soft, and you have to be nurturing, and you have to cry when it's needed. You have to have this balance when it comes into your work, with your personal life, with your partner, and your relationships. And that's, I think, what leads to being a whole rounded human. And it's by balancing these two energies within yourself. And so now let's go into the application of this law of gender. In Reality Transurfing, we have our own concepts and terminology that corresponds with the law of gender, and that is inner and outer intention. The masculine principle corresponds with internal intention or inner intention, which is the will to have and act. And the female principle corresponds with outer intention, which is the creative power of the universe that brings your goal to you. You direct with the masculine, inner, and then you allow with the feminine, outer intention to produce the results. So I'm just going to write that down for our reference. Inner intention and outer intention. In order for me to explain outer intention, I have to explain inner intention first. But outer, just as a heads up, outer intention is formed at the unity of heart and mind. Okay, so let's quickly explain inner intention. Say I have this pencil and it's lying on the table in my hand, and I want to pick up this pencil. So I have a desire to pick up the pencil. Desire alone does nothing, right? Just wanting something does not create anything, right? In your manifestations, desire simply means that you do not have. You want to acquire it. You need action. Action is going to give it to you. But how do I act on that? What makes my hand grab this and pull it in? It's not the mind. The mind is wonderful little trickster. It likes to make us believe that it is in charge and it is the reason for everything that happens in our life, but it's not. Because it's not going, extend your elbow, open up your phalanges, grab your phalanges around the pencil, now bring it into yourself. It doesn't do any of that. I just want it, and then I decide to have it, and then I have it. And so what turns desire into action? Intention. So how do we define intention? It is resoluteness in the decision to have and act. So the inner intention of me using my hand to pick up this pencil, I desire does nothing, but then I am resolute in the decision to have and act. It activates inner intention, and this all happens automatically. We have to make sense of it. And then I just grab the pencil. Even that definition is not pure because we don't have a place in our mental filing cabinet for the power of intention. It is this magical intelligence that works symbiotically with our whole being, that makes things happen. I think it's the same intelligence that keeps us conscious when we get knocked unconscious. It's the same intelligence that breathes for us, right? It's this beingness that makes things happen. How am I able to talk like this? I have no idea what words are going to come out of my mouth. I just set a direction, which is inner intention. I have this idea that I want to express, and then I just allow things to flow. And when I'm able to get on that, wave of consciousness and really detach and get out of my way, it becomes much more fluid. And sometimes I stumble over myself, but that's okay. We get through it. And so let's move on. Now, that inner intention, that hand, your hand, can then be extended to outer intention, which is the invisible hand that helps bring your goals into fruition, that brings your manifestations into form. We mentioned outer intention gets activated at the unity of heart. I'm going to draw two of them, and mind. I don't know how to draw a mind, so we're going to say a brain. We're going to do this cloud thing. Oh, is this? Okay, it's beginning to lag on me. It's because I've been using this iPad too much. Okay, so it's at the unity of heart and mind. It's a brand new iPad. The best way of explaining this is by illuminating on the idea as to why we're so amazing at manifesting our worst expectations while our desires always feel so far away and more elusive. And it has to do with this. It has to do with the unity of heart and mind. And so what happens is that in order for outer intention to be activated, your heart and mind need to move in the same direction. In this case, heart is the subconscious, which is referred to as the feminine, and the mind is your logic. And so when heart and mind are in unity, you have a clear image, manifestation forms, right? When they're moving in the same direction. When heart and mind are in disagreement, your image is completely distorted. So why are we so amazing at manifesting our worst expectations? It's because you have an idea of what you want consciously, and your soul also has an idea of what it wants. When you hate something or you have an aversion to something, you do so with your whole being, with your whole body. If you're afraid of something, of, let's say, loneliness, and you have a significant aversion to it, right? your mind, your world self, Vlad doesn't want to be lonely, and neither does your soul. And what happens? You create an image, a manifested reality where you're lonely, or when you're with a partner that does not agree with you, and you end up feeling lonely in the relationship anyways. And so when it comes to why it's hard to manifest our real desires, is because the soul wants to do something. It has an idea of what it came onto this planet for. But the mind, polluted by pendulum, the matrix, society, parents, the school system, it has, it developed its goals that it's not in accordance with the heart. And the heart is pulling in one direction. It goes, hey man, I want to have a bakery. We'll have an amazing life. We can be successful having a bakery. But the mind is like, how are we going to make that happen? I'm not an amazing baker. Bakers don't make that much money. Restaurants are the worst business to get into. Blah, 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 blah. It does all of these things because it gets in its own way. It creates importance. I'm not good enough, and the mountain is too high to climb. And so you see there's a distortion in the mirror because they're not moving in coherence, right? They're not in harmony. And so that's why it's so important to, and I'm going to make another lesson on this, is to follow your heart, because you really have no choice but to follow your heart in this life. It's much easier. It's impossible to convince your soul to move in a direction that it doesn't want to, right? The subconscious is way more powerful. It is like riding a 10-ton mythical dragon. You can't pull it. It's really hard to direct it, right? If it doesn't want to move in a particular way. And so it's much better to move in a direction that your soul desires and then convince the mind that it's possible. And so that's what that's all about. That's how we use the law of gender when it comes to reality transurfing. And the way to do that, the way of convincing the mind, is through slides and, using the plate and through visualization over time. What you do is by using the slide and visualizing your goal, your target slide, your goal, an image of your goal being achieved. What you do in that case is you set the trajectory of the alternative space in the direction of your choosing, and you also end up expanding, that's ugly, expanding your comfort zone. So that idea that this super lucrative $1 million bakery is actually possible. And the more that you use your slide, the more your comfort zone expands, and the more that your mind accepts that it is possible. And then you begin to activate outer intention. Doors open up for you, opportunities open up to you, ideas come into place, and things start moving in the direction of that reality. Cool. And so that brings us to the end of the 7 laws of the universe. Thank you so much for being with me on this amazing journey. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, speaking with you all and creating it. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful day. Mwah.